Hello and welcome to Hughes of the World. Today we are going to Cuba. Cuba, I've got my little Cuba lonely planet here. I'll tell you all about it. But first of all, big shout out to everyone in the chat. Hello, how are you all doing out there? We've got Russell Cannon in the chat. We've got Sarah Davis. We've got Andrew Ray saying, "Que pasa?" We've got number 3 in there as well. Hello, everyone. If you would like to join them in the chat, just hit the subscribe button now. And you can join. Sorry about the delay getting started there. My just everything that could go wrong. Everything that could go wrong. But doesn't matter now. Let's just crack on, shall we? No time like the present. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about the history of Cuba, the geography of Cuba, the people of Cuba. I'm also going to be sharing with you my journey to Cuba on a sailboat from Florida. So I'll be showing you that at the end of the show. So if you hang on for that, might be fun, might be funny. I don't know. Anyway, so we're going to have a look at Cuba as a country that we've all heard of. Like, it's not one of these countries that you go in and say, "Have you ever heard of Cuba?" And people are like, no, it's not like Djibouti or St. Kitts and Nevis or Sao Tome and Principe. It's a well-known country, isn't it? It's a country of revolution. It's a country of resilience. It's a country of rhythm. It's unlike anywhere else on earth because it doesn't really have the same amount of tourism that kind of ruins it, but also there are some places that don't have tourism, but they're not very nice to go to as a tourist. That's probably why they don't have tourism. This is a place that's really lovely to go to as a tourist, and it doesn't have much tourism because Americans technically aren't allowed to go there. You know, they still have to pretend they haven't been. They still have to stamp a bit of paper instead of stamping their passport when they go there. Something I had to do because I was going to be traveling back into America after visiting Cuba, so they had to stamp a bit of paper. The only other country in the world where I had to stamp a bit of paper was, instead of my passport, was in Israel. True story. Sarah Dave says, "Hi, Graham." Hello. Hey, look, Graham's just as that guy from the cover of Man of the World. For World Book Day. A very good point. Thank you. I've come up as myself. I suggested that my stepdaughters one of them could go as me to World Book Day today, but neither of them really into that idea for some reason. I don't know why. Anyway, it is World Book Day today, which is kind of cool. But I don't. I mean, kids are going in as Taylor Swift. One kid I heard went in as Minecraft because he had a book about tips to play Minecraft. He's like, "I'm going as Minecraft." Not quite what the idea was, but hey, it's all right. It's better than a million people all dressed as Harry Potter. So anyway, with Spanish colonial history, US influence, Soviet Revolution, Socialist Revolution, and Cold War era intrigue, the story of Cuba is as complex as it is fascinating, from the cobbled streets of Havana, where classic 1950s cars roll past, crumbling yet beautiful colonial buildings, to the tobacco fields of Viñelas, to the pristine beaches of Valderraro, and the music-filled bars of Santiago. Cuba is a country that feels frozen in time, and yet it's full of life and energy. I'm yet to meet someone who's been to Cuba who didn't have a good time in Cuba. That's what it's like. It's weird because we're told, a bit like Iran, it's one of those countries where we're told the government's terrible and they do these terrible things, but when you actually visit there, the people are lovely. The people are like the best. So I'd really recommend it, people to go visit. But, whatever you think of Fidel Castro, Che Guevara, Hemingway's haunt in Havana, or dancing to the Buena Vista Social Club, Cuba has always left an impression. It's kind of like Liverpool in that respect, that it kind of punches above its weight on the world stage. It's somewhere that it's just an island in the Caribbean. I mean, it's the biggest island in the Caribbean, but it's just an island in the Caribbean. But it seems to have this outsized presence in the world. And again, I mean, a lot of people haven't heard of some of the countries in the Caribbean. Just one of those things, isn't it? But Cuba's pretty well known, put it that way. So let's have a look at the map of the world. Here's the world with Cuba there in the middle. There's Cuba. So I'll zoom in on old Cuba. It is, like I said, the largest island in the Caribbean. It's just 90 miles south of Florida. Here's Key West over here in Florida, and there's Havana. You can do that in a jet ski. You can do it in a jet ski. You're feeling brave. I mean, it might get a bit ridiculous. You might die, but you could do it in a jet ski. Totally could. It's surrounded by the Gulf of Mexico, not the fucking Gulf of America. It's the Gulf of Mexico. It's a Gulf of... It's by the Gulf of Mexico. It's surrounded by the Gulf of Mexico on the north side, and then the Caribbean Sea under here, which is on the south side. So that's Gulf of Mexico, Caribbean Sea. Don't get them mixed up. The Bahamas is not in the Caribbean. Turks and Caicos is not technically in the Caribbean because it's not in the Caribbean Sea. It is the Caribbean. We all regard it as that area as the Caribbean, but technically, Barbados is a bit outside the rest of the Caribbean as well. But I digress. So we'll zoom back into Cuba here. The terrain is mostly flat plains and rolling hills with mountainous regions to the east. The Sierra Maestra to the east of the country. If we go to terrain, you can see. You can see the different areas where you do have a little bit of mountainous areas here near Santiago de Cuba and here over in the east. Over here, very beautiful part of the world. There are over 4,000 islands and keys that make up Cuba. 4,000. This is the big one in the middle, but then there's loads of small ones around it. And that includes the Isla de Juventod. I'm going to say this correctly. Juventod. That's like German, doesn't it? Hello, my name is Mr. Juventod. But yeah, it looks like Juventus, but it's pronounced Juventod. And also, we'll talk about the climate. It is tropical. It is nice and hot all year round. There it is. I don't know if you can get the actual tropics up on this map. I don't think you can, but you can certainly get the old equator there. You can see it's not far. It's not far from the old equator. So Panama, where Ginger Island is, that's 9 degrees. So it's probably about 20 degrees north of the equator. So it's subtropical and tropical. It's hot all year round. Well, at least warm all year, but it is prone to hurricanes from June to November, possibly beyond, because, climate change. The time zone is GMT -5. That's Cuba Standard Time, and it goes to GMT -4 during daylight savings, which is from March to November. So, there you go. That's a little introduction. There it is in the world. Cuba in the middle between South America down here, hello South America, and North America up here. There's Canada at the top there. There's Greater Canada, or South Canada as I like to call it, over here. And then there's Mexico. Anyway, so just go back to the main... Oh, hang on. Just got the intro again. Oh, that's all right. Wasn't expecting that. Hello, intro. Hey, I'm back. That's professional. What are people saying in the chat? We've got Duke Vengeance. I suppose Cuba is weak to tsunamis, having so much of his land. Well, yeah. It's not really an area where they get massive tsunamis. Tsunamis are a particular problem in the Pacific. Not to big earthquakes. Because of the way the tectonic plates lie, especially around the Caribbean and Central America, there's lots of small breaks in it. So it doesn't have like a big fault that can really ratchet up the tension that you kind of need to have a particularly devastating earthquake that would result in a deadly tsunami. But, there's been earthquakes. Mexico City, lots of people died. Those places have earthquakes all the time. I've been in a number of earthquakes in Panama. I was in an earthquake in a place called Merida in Mexico. It literally shook the whole room and bits came from the ceiling. But the thing about an earthquake is that when you realize, especially if you're asleep, so you wake up, you get shaken awake, and by the time you've realized that it's an earthquake, it's usually stopped. They only last for maybe 10 seconds, 20 seconds, something like that. So it's not like you can get out of the building that you're in or go and hide in the doorway or whatever, or under a table is actually. Don't hide in a doorway, go under a table. Go under a table or a bed or something like that. Put a mattress on top of you in case that something lands on top of you, which isn't great. But the earthquake that I experienced in Merida, although I thought it was quite a quake, it didn't wake my girlfriend up. My girlfriend at the time was asleep next to me, and she didn't wake up. And I shook her awake and said, we just had an earthquake. And that's why we're covered in plaster. Because then all this plaster came down from the ceiling and landed on the bed. And I'm like, we just had an earthquake. And she's like, oh all right then. Slept through it. I guess the ground moved. What can I say? Anyway, so fun facts about Cuba. Classic cars are everywhere. Due to the US embargo, Cuba is a living car museum packed with these vintage 1950 Chevys, Buicks, Fords, etc. The other thing they're famous for is Cuban cigars, regarded as the best in the world. The Viñanes, I think that's pronounced, Viñanes, and the Pinar de Rio are hand-rolled and highly sought after. Hand-rolled on the thighs of virgins. I don't think that's true, but whatever. Imagine turning up at the place where they make the cigars. You turn up and it's like it's rolled on the thighs of virgins, and there's like these teenage spotty male gamers. one hand they're playing Diablo for, and then the other hand they're kind of like rubbing their thighs, rubbing their fat sweaty thighs with your cigars. Chew on that. That'd be brilliant. I love it. Anyway, so music and dance. Cuba is the birthplace of salsa. The dance, not just the sauce. Son rumba as well is from Cuba. The cha-cha-cha is from Cuba as well. The mambo is from Cuba, and the reggaeton is also from Cuba as well. I mean, it's an amazing musical legacy. Dance legacy of this very flamboyant Caribbean nation. Also, Cuba has a 99.8% literacy rate, one of the highest in the world. It's just quite remarkable. It has free healthcare. It's one of the few countries around the world that has totally free healthcare, along with the UK. Free at the point of use. Despite the economic struggles it's had over the years, Cuba has one of the best healthcare systems in Latin America, and actually exports doctors all over the world. And when I was traveling, I met quite a few doctors working in developing nations who would come from Cuba. They have some of the world's best beaches, Val de Rio, and Cayo, which or Cayo, I should say, are consistently ranked amongst the top beaches worldwide, and they're not completely packed out with people like they are in Greece or Spain or Italy or somewhere. And they also are famous for being the home of the Mojito, the daiquiri, the Cuba Libre, and the Pina Colada, although that's disputed with Puerto Rico. But come on. Music, dance, booze, beaches. This is like heaven for me. And classic cars. I love classic cars. So yeah, Cuba is quite a special place for me for those reasons. Because you know what? At the end of the day, I don't want to sit there, discussing politics in a cold room. I'd rather just be having a party on a beach where everyone's just having a great time and dancing and just laughing. And I think do you remember when we had the good time? Do you remember when we used to be allowed to have a good time? Oh, I don't know. Anyway, Havana is a World Heritage Site. Old Havana is anyway. Havana Vieja, which is filled with colonial era buildings and forts and grand piazzas. And also you've got the Buena Vista Social Club, which is the legendary Cuban band, which revived global interest in Cuban music in the 1990s. There was a big movie that came out, big for like indie music fans, called the Buena Vista Social Club, which really put them on the map again. And more popular than football in Cuba, which might come as some surprise because it's a Latin American country, kind of, it's baseball. They are mad about baseball. Baseball is Cuba's national sport. I believe Fidel Castro wanted to be a baseball player when he was a kid, or so I've been told. Anyway, the capital is Havana, the largest city in the Caribbean, known for its malecon, the seafront promenade, and colourful Spanish colonial architecture, and, as I've mentioned a few times already, the lively music scene. The flag, which is fluttering here in the top left corner, this was adopted in 1902. It was designed in 1849 by Cuban exiles in New York. And yes, the star is related in a weird way to the Star of Texas. And the people who made this flag were the people who wanted to keep the slaves being slaves. So I don't know why they adopted it, but there you go. That's the flag of Cuba. So, fly it, don't fly it. I don't know. Just seemed like a bit of a weird thing to adopt. They were like, yay, we're going to have like a star like they have in Texas where they have loads of slaves because we like having slaves. The 3 blue stripes represent the original 3 Cuban provinces. The 2 white stripes symbolize purity and independence for some reason. The red triangle, you're not going to guess this, right? The red triangle stands for the blood that was shed by the martyrs, as it is on every flag. Well, I don't know how the red in the British flag is the blood, the martyrs, but whatever. And then you've got the white 5-pointed star, which represents independence and freedom, as they say in Cuba. Possibly not that way. Cuba's name comes from a Teneo word meaning great land or fertile place, although it is contested where the actual name comes from. Apparently, Christopher Columbus recorded the name during his first voyage in 1492, but he didn't call it Cuba. He called it Juana, who was the daughter of Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand of Spain. She was one of their daughters. I think she was the eldest daughter. So he called it Juana. True story. It sounds a bit like Cuba, doesn't it? Cuba, Juana. You say potato? I say potato. There you go. Red is blood. Blood. Well, there's a story about the British flag, isn't there? Sorry, the English flag. The English flag, isn't it? Or was it Danish? No. What flag is it? Oh, I know. It's the Austrian flag. Okay, so there's a guy in Austria back in the day, and he's having a fight because he's, I don't know, someone who has fights, and he's in battle, and he's wearing a white tunic, right? And he gets absolutely covered in blood. You know, like the end of Carrie, he's just covered in blood, right? But he's got a big fat belt on, you know, which he's got his sword in or whatever. He's got this belt on. And when he took the belt off at the end of the battle, he had this perfect white band around him. And that's why the flag of Austria is red, white band, red. Yeah, that is literally the blood of the people who fought for independence and martyrdom and all that kind of stuff. Right, Cuba, here's history. Right, so before 1942? No, 1492. When Columbus turned up. Right. Before then, the original inhabitants of Cuba were 3 main indigenous groups. The Guanahatabey, I'll say that again, the Guanahatabey, easy for you to say. They are a small reclusive group that lived in the west, possibly the remnants of earlier migration. There was the Sibona, who lived in small villages along the coast, primarily in caves and huts, practicing fishing and gathering. And there was the Taeno, who they were the dominant group at the time of Columbus's arrival, and they had a complex society with farming, fishing, and pottery making. The Teneo lived in villages, and they were called Bateyes, and they lived in houses called Bohíos. They were circular thatched houses. They were the houses that Christopher Columbus would have seen when he bloody turned up like a twat. They worshipped spirits called Zamies, and they practice a communal lifestyle. Sounds good to me. Their staple crops included yuca or cassava, corn, maize, sweet potato, and beans. Frijoles. And they developed a complex ball game and had a chiefdom-based political structure run by the rulers who were called the caciques. The ball game that they played, similarities, obviously, there with the Mayans, which went too far away from Cuba. If you have a look on the map. Should we go back to the map? Let's go back to the map for a moment. Hang on, I just make sure that I've turned the intro off. Yeah, won't come back on again. If you look on the map here, you can see the distance from this little tip of Cuba here. This is Maria del Gorda, down here, Maria La Gorda. We'll talk more about Maria later, but Maria La Gorda means Maria the Fat, and she was a favourite lady of the night amongst sailors who used to come here, and so they named the town after her, which is nice. Anyway, so if you were going to go off from Las Tumblas or Maria La Gorda there, you can get over to Cancun pretty easily. That is not very far. You're talking about 60 kilometers or so. And then you have the Yucatan Peninsula. And obviously this whole area here of Central of America, of Mexico, and some of the places in Central America like Guatemala, Belize, and a little bit of Honduras, made up the Mayan Empire. The Mayan Empire, who also had a famous ball game that they used to play, where they had to get the ball through a hoop. They played with like hockey sticks, we think, and then they had to sort of scoop the ball up with the hockey stick and try and get it through a hole. This is in Mexico, and that was a stone hole, and they had to try and scoop it and get it through. Very difficult. I saw a group of people playing Mexican ball game when I was in Merida, the same place that the earthquake happened, which is in the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, and they thought they'd spice up proceedings by setting the ball on fire. So it was like Mayan fire hockey, which is so cool. It's so cool. It is so cool. Anyway, so moving on. So yes, so everything was going, all right. The Caribs turned up. They were difficult. The Caribs are the people that the Caribbean are named after. But you don't meet Caribs these days because someone wiped them all out. Don't know who. Also, Caribs is from where we get the word cannibal. Oh yes, there was the Caribs and the Arawaks in pre-Columbian times in the in what's now the Caribbean. The Caribs were very warlike and went around raping and pillaging, whereas the Arawaks were more docile and chilled out and just wanted to have a good time. There are descendants of Arawaks still around, but the Caribs, I don't even know what happened to the Caribs. Maybe there's some people who can trace their bloodline back to the original Caribs, but not many. Anyway, so on a fateful day in 1492, turns up this gobshite from Italy called Cristobal Colon, or as we know him, Christopher Columbus. He turned up on October the 27th. He landed on Cuba's northeast coast near present-day Bariji, and he named the country, or named the land. He didn't know it was a country. He didn't know what it was at the time. He thought that it was a peninsula of Asia. He did not know it was an island when he was there. It wasn't discovered till a while afterwards that it was a peninsula of an island. It wasn't a peninsula. It was actually an island in its own right once someone did a circumnavigation of the island. He named it Juana in honor of Prince Juan of Spain, but the name Cuba derived from the indigenous word stuck. The prince? What was it named after? I thought it was named after the princess. I'm going to have to check my notes. I made a mistake there. Oh well. Juana, that's what he called it. But the name Cuba, which was derived from indigenous words, that was a name that stuck. Columbus wrote about the island's rich lands, the abundant tobacco plants, and welcoming people, and he believed it was part of Asia. Conquest and civilization from sort of 1511 to 1514. In 1511, Diego Vasquez de Cuellar led an expedition to conquer the island, and he founded the first Spanish settlements. The cities he founded, the original 3 cities that he founded, were Baracoa, which was the first Spanish capital in 1511. Santiago de Cuba, 1515, became the capital in 1522. And then Havana, as we all know it, that was founded in 1519. It was founded as a strategic port, and it later became the permanent capital. And so Santiago de Cuba and Havana are amongst the oldest cities in the Americas, not just in the Caribbean, but in the Americas. The Taino resisted Spanish rule, led by their leader, who was called Atway, but they were crushed by the Spanish almost completely wiped out due to disease, forced labor, and war. The Europeans brought with them, I should say brought with us, I'll take the blame for this, we brought with us smallpox. But in some ways, the indigenous people of the Americas had the last laugh. Because you know what they brought back? Syphilis. Yeah. Be careful what you get up to on those, hot, sweaty nights in Havana. Anyway, so then Cuba became an essential hub for Spanish trade and military operations in the Caribbean. They used it alongside their other Spanish holdings that at the time included places like Haiti and Dominican Republic, and also the Puerto Rico and Jamaica and all these places. You know, they were all under Spanish rule at this time. And then, but by the 1800s, Havana had become one of Spain's most fortified cities to defend against almost constant attack from English, French, and Dutch pirates, or as they like to call themselves, privateers. Because if you're thieving on behalf of the crown, then you're not really a thief, are you? Are you? That's fine. And that's why we have flagged vessels, because you had to know where the ship was from, because British privateers were not allowed to go and attack British ships. Actually, this is before Britain existed as a country. English couldn't go and, you know what I mean. Anyway, but yeah, it was English pirates, not British pirates. I don't think there were too many Welsh pirates out there at the time. In 1762, the British briefly captured Havana during the 7 Years' War, only to return it to Spain in exchange for Florida. It's a hell of a place. In 1763. So that happened. The British had Cuba for a year. There is literally nowhere on this planet that the British probably haven't invaded at some point. At some point in time. So then, by the 18th century, Cuba's economy was transformed by a massive sugar rush, essentially, like a gold rush, but with sugar. These sugar plantations, which were worked by enslaved Africans. By 1820, Cuba was producing 1/3 of all the world's sugar, which is that's a lot. That's insane for a small island, right? Relatively, over 1 million enslaved Africans were brought just to Cuba. Never mind the rest of the slave plantations in Brazil and the US and other countries in the West Indies. This is an eye-watering number of people. 1 million people. Slavery is still one of the biggest crimes that has ever been committed by humans. And when people go, "Oh, you're always going about slavery," to black people, it's like, can you fuck off? This was less than 200 years ago. You know, this was happening less than 200 years ago. Some of the landed families in this country are rich, and their kids get to go to posh public school and tell everyone to vote for Brexit because their ancestors owned slaves. And ancestral wealth is a huge thing in the UK. That's why we don't tax the wealthy, which we should do. We absolutely should do. Santeria, a mix of Yoruba religion and Catholicism, became widespread across the country. And then in the 1800s, calls for revolution, calls for independence began. This was inspired by Haiti's successful revolution from 1791 to 1804, and Cuban rebels began plotting for freedom. I could just keep doing that. I can do this all day. Carlos Manuel de Casperos, he freed his slaves in 1868, sparking the 10 Years' War, which went from 1868 to 1878 against Spanish rules. Against Spanish rule. Well, I guess and rules, but, you know, against Spanish rule. Something that happened in 1848, which has, you know, prescience today. America asked if they could buy Cuba off the Spanish. You're going to sense a theme coming on in a moment. I'm pretty sure you're going to sense a bit of a theme as we go into the machinations of the US and their relationship with Cuba over the years. It's just basically a lot of, destabilization, invasions, propping up dictators. It's not a particularly happy story. I can see why most Cubans wouldn't like Americans, but ironically enough, if an American goes to Cuba, the Cubans are overwhelmingly friendly to them because they're like, "Oh my God, you defied your country's embargo and you came here. Wow, I like you," which is kind of cool. So the 10 Years' War was Cuba's first major war against Spain, and that was led by I don't know how to pronounce it. I think it's Cespedes, Carlos Manuel de Cespedes. The Little War, that was the Guerra Chiquita, which was a second failed uprising, went from 1879 till 1880, so it only went for a year. And then in 1894, the US slapped a bunch of tariffs on Cuba, which at the time was still a Spanish holding. It was a Spanish overseas territory, and they were mounting for independence. And America went, I know, let's destabilize your currency, which they did. And that led to the Cuban War of Independence, which went from, or the second Cuban War of Independence, really, which went from, well, third, arguably, which went from 1895 to 1898. And that was led by Jose Marti, who was this famous writer and playwright and poet, and he died quite early on in the conflict, and he was martyred, and people used him as a talisman for pushing for against Spanish rule. And then we had what they then, after the event, called the Spanish-American War. The US entered the war after there was a ship called the USS Maine, right? And it was anchored off Havana for a few weeks, right? Just sitting there, looking menacing, full of munitions. And then one day, it blew up. Now, I am not a conspiracy theorist. I wasn't there. I don't know. But that did allow America to start a pretext for the Spanish-American War, right? Which got like half of bloody Mexico in that. You know, like there was a lot of shit went down. A lot of shit went down in that war, right? But the pretext was the fact that the rebels or the Spanish or someone had blown up this ship. But what's funny about it is this, that the captain and most of the officers were not on the ship when it exploded. I mean, there was about 200 crew on. They all died. Screaming, presumably. But, yeah, the people in charge of the ship weren't on the ship when it blew up. So some have said that it might have been a false flag operation by the US as a pretext for declaring war on Spain and to get hold of its Spanish properties. It's called the American-Spanish War, but the reality is, I mean, they didn't go to Spain. They didn't fight in Spain. They were fighting in the New World. They just wanted all the Spanish possessions they could get their greasy little mitts on. So there you go. So after the Spanish-American War of 1898, Spain formally ceded Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines to the United States. Although Cuba was promised independence, the US maintained control of the island for 4 years under military occupation. And on May the 20th, 1902, Cuba became officially independent, but with significant US influence. The newly written Cuban Constitution included the Platt Amendment. Doesn't sound very Cuban, does it? The Platt Amendment. No, it was forced in by the Americans, which gave the US the right to intervene in Cuban affairs whenever it saw fit. It also allowed the US to establish a little place called Guantanamo Bay, which remains under American control to this day, despite Cuban protests. Now, I did a bit of reading about this, and the deal, I might mention this later. Does this come up later? The deal for Guantanamo was a 99-year lease, and that was signed in 1933. So in 2032, just 7 years from now, that lease should be up. However, due to the overwhelming power of the US compared with little plucky old Cuba, both sides have to agree to relinquish control of the base for the base to have its control relinquished. Yeah, I don't know. Where were we? We were at the turn of the century, weren't we? So they just had independence. That's nice, isn't it? But the US have the right to intervene whenever they see fit, and also they got Guantanamo Bay out of the deal, which is awful, and it's the sort of thing that the British did all the time. We had 2 wars with China over the fact that they wouldn't let us flood their streets with opium and get all their people in their country addicted to heroin, effectively, Victorian heroin. And they didn't like that, and they were like, can you stop doing that? And we said no, and we burnt down the Summer Palace. We absolutely bombarded the shit out of Shanghai, And then we decided to take Hong Kong Island and Kowloon off them and say, right, these are ours now. Nice. By the 1920s, Cuba was heavily dependent on sugar exports, with more than 80% of its sugar being exported to, where else? The US. They loved their sugar. American corporations controlled land, railways, utilities, and most importantly, possibly for the economy over there, banking, making Cuba's economy closely tied to the fluctuation of the US market. Now, what happened in the 1920s that might have affected that? I don't know. Maybe the Wall Street crash. I don't know. But before then, we had prohibition. From 1920 to 1933, America thought it'd be a good idea to ban alcohol across the country, across the nation. It wasn't just a law. It was an amendment to the freaking Constitution. Would you believe? Jesus. That wasn't a good idea, was it? It really wasn't a good idea. Cuba became a popular destination at this time for Americans seeking alcohol. You could either go to cold Canada or you go to nice warm Cuba, caliente Cuba. Cold Canada or caliente Cuba. It's up to you. So Cuba became a popular destination for Americans seeking alcohol, casinos, nightlife, leading to the rise of organized crime in Havana. So not only did the Americans kind of take over their economy and take over bits of their land, they also decided to introduce Al Capone and other gangsters to Cuba. Bit of a plot thing, isn't it? Going to Cuba in Godfather, Boardwalk Empire. Yeah, that's what they did. Umka, thank you very much for the €2 super chat. I think this is the first super chat we've got on this so far. Oh, hang on, I pressed the wrong button. That was the subscribe button. Try that again, shall we? Thank you very much, Umka, for the €2. Really appreciate it. I think that's the first one we've got on the whole Hughes of the world since I brought it back a few weeks ago. Anyway, moving on. Thank you. So yeah, alcohol, casinos, nightlife, organized crime. Woo! And then we had the 1933 Revolution and the rise of Batista, whose name you will learn quite quickly because it's going to come up a lot. In 1933, the student-led uprising and military coup overthrew President Gerardo Machado, not Machacho, but Machado, a corrupt dictator. This period saw the emergence of Fulgencio, that's a difficult word to say. Fulgencio Batista, which is a lot easier to say. I'll just call him Batista from now on, who was an army sergeant who quickly seized control behind the scenes, effectively ruling Cuba from 1933 to 1944. Batista initially aligned himself with leftist movements, introduced labor reforms, and promoted the 1939 Cuban Constitution, which was seen as progressive in the time. And then we had the democratic period from 1944 to 1952. In 1944, Batista stepped down and was succeeded by Ramon Gru San Martin, who promoted social and economic reforms. However, corruption remained rampant and Cuba's economy continued to be heavily influenced by American business interests and organized crime syndicates, like the frickin' mafia. Thanks for that. Thanks for we'll send you our sugar and you can just give us all your gangsters, America. Yeah, America not sending its best. All those guns that are used by gun gangs, drug gangs in Mexico, yeah, they all come from America. So all the violence, the drugs come from the south, all the violence comes from the north. Thanks for that, America. It's not showing itself in glory in this story, is it? The Havana Conference of 1946 saw top mafia bosses like Lucky Luciano and Maya Lansky meet in Havana to establish Havana as a major hub for organized crime, drugs, and gambling. Which, don't forget, in a lot of places in America, it's illegal to gamble. That's why in Native American reservations they can have casinos, because they're not necessarily covered by the same laws as the rest of the state. There are still dry counties in America where you can't get a drink. It's a bit like Saudi Arabia in that respect, or Iran. Also, countries run by a bunch of religious zealots, so very much like Saudi Arabia in that respect. But the reason why Las Vegas became a place in the middle of nowhere in Nevada was because people would go there to watch atomic bombs being blown up. It was called Atomic City. That's how it started. And then the gangsters turned up and went, hey, we can gamble here. And one of the weird things about Nevada is apparently in Nevada, prostitution is legal, except in Las Vegas where it's not. Which is really weird. Do you pick someone up into Las Vegas and take them out of the city limits, and then you can have sex? And is that trafficking someone? I mean, how does it work? Can you take them over the border, pay them, and then come back, or can you just get a camera out and pretend that you're filming a porno, which is completely legal for some reason, even though it's the same thing, isn't it? You're just filming it. No, this woman is an actress. We're making a porn. Anyway, I digress. In 1952, Batista, who had returned to Cuba from exile, staged a coup d'etat, cancelled elections, and declared himself president, as you do. This marked the beginning of his second rule from 1952 to 1959, which became far more oppressive and dictatorial than before. And then in the 1950s, Havana was known as the playground of the mafia. Under Batista, Havana became known as the Las Vegas of the Caribbean. The mafia controlled Havana's casinos, hotels, and brothels, with Batista taking bribes and kickbacks in exchange for allowing criminal operations to flourish, and flourish they did. Tourism boomed, and Cuba became a major destination for American celebrities, wealthy businessmen, and gangsters. Meanwhile, the Cuban people suffered from widening inequality, political repression, and police brutality, laying the groundwork for the Cuban Revolution, which I'll go into in a minute. If you want to learn more about what Cuba was like at this time, reading a bit of Hemingway would be a good idea. The Old Man and the Sea is set in Cuba. The old man, Santiago, is he's telling the story of this guy who tried to catch this massive fish, and it's Hemingway, so it's not a happy ending. What can I say? He didn't have a happy ending either. You know what I mean? Like, it's just the way it is. But he spent a lot of time in Havana. He spent a lot of time in Cuba. He really loved the place. He lived in Key West. It was only over the road, essentially. The road being the Gulf of Mexico, which is called the Gulf of Mexico, by the way, not the Gulf of America. It's called the Gulf of Mexico because that's the name of the thing that has the name. That's the name of it. Don't care what Google is now telling us for some stupid reason. On July the 26th, 1953, a group of revolutionaries led by a chap called Fidel Castro, never heard of him, and his brother Raul attempted to storm the Moncada barracks in Santiago de Cuba. The attack failed. Castro was captured and sentenced to 15 years in prison. It was supposed to be a surprise attack. They got seen, and he got sentenced to 15 years in prison. While in prison, he wrote a book called History Will Absolve Me, outlining his revolutionary ideology. And due to political pressure, Batista pardoned Castro in 1955, and he went into exile in Mexico, where he met a chap called Che Guevara and began plotting the Cuban Revolution. In 1956, Castro, Che Guevara, and 80 other revolutionaries landed in Cuba aboard the Granma. That was the name of the ship. It was called the Granma. Not the Grandma, but the Granma. Like, no D. Grandma. All aboard the Granma, everyone. Okay, is everyone on board the Granma? Oh, she's a fine ship. She's old, but she's got it where it counts. Anyway, moving on. They were ambushed by Batista's forces, but a small group survived and retreated into the Sierra Maestra Mountains. Over the next 2 years, they mounted a guerrilla war against Batista's government, gaining widespread support from students, workers, and peasants. On January the 1st, 1959, Batista fled Cuba and Castro's forces entered Havana victorious. Castro nationalized US-owned businesses, which led to tensions with Washington. And then there was the Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961, which was a failed CIA-backed attempt to overthrow Castro. It was an absolute bloody disaster, all things considered. This was under the presidency of John F. Kennedy. In 1962, the world came close to nuclear war during the Cuban Missile Crisis when the Soviet Union installed nuclear weapons in Cuba, and we had 7 days to save the world, or whatever it's called. There's a good movie called 7 Days. I think it's called 7 Days, with Kevin Costner in it, and it's worth watching. It lets you know exactly, what kind of went on then, and why the Soviets put the missiles there in the first place, which is also quite interesting. It's got something to do with the Americans putting missiles near the border with the Soviet Union, and they were like, oh, we're going to put them in Cuba then, and yeah, led to led to a nuclear standoff, which very nearly led to the end of the world. Well, we were lucky. It didn't end. Woohoo! Andrew Ray, thank you very much to Andrew Ray there for the £5 super chat. That's very kind of you, Andrew Ray. Thanks, Graham, for educating us of the horrors of America on Cubans and the despicable embargo that the UN have condemned for decades, but vetoed by the US. Well, we're going to get to that. We're going to get to that. Bloody hell. Yeah, mate. Thanks for the super chat, Andrew. It's just mad. It's just mad. Anyway, over the next 3 decades, Cuba aligned itself with the USSR, receiving economic aid in exchange for supporting communist revolutions worldwide, including in Africa. From sort of 1991 to now, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Cuba lost 80% of its trade and economic aid, and plunging the country into the worst economic crisis it's ever had. Food and fuel shortages led to massive hardships, and thousands of Cubans attempted to flee to the US on homemade rafts. This was called the Balseros Crisis of 1994. And the government introduced limited capitalist reforms, allowing a small private businesses to operate to allow tourism to survive. They also allow people to have dollars. You can have dollars there. You can use dollars. Under Raul Castro in 2008, so Fidel stepped down due to illness in 2008, and his brother took over. Because it's not a monarchy, honest. I would like them to have free and fair elections. I would. I really would, but they don't. So, it's just the way it is. Anyway, Raul took over and he implemented economic reforms while maintaining political control. The government allowed private restaurants. These were called paladeras and self-employment. He also he allowed a small but sort of growing private sector to sort of, fester. Fester? Is that the right word? No, that's not the right word, is it? To increase in size. From sort of 2014 was a good year, actually, because Barack Obama and Raul Castro, they announced diplomatic relations will be restored, reopening embassies and easing travel restrictions, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. However, in 2017, some horrible little orange twat, some horrible little greasy splodge of a man with a bad wig on called Donald Trump, don't know what happened to him, he reversed many of these policies and tightened the US embargo because, as I just said, he's a twat. Anyway, so Raul Castro stepped down from the presidency on the 19th of April 2018 after his successor, Miguel Diaz-Canel, was elected by the National Assembly following parliamentary elections. Since 2021, Cuba has faced mass protests, economic struggles, and ongoing US sanctions, with political dissent arguably increasing. And it remains a one-party communist state at the moment, but with slow economic liberalization. Tourism and agriculture and remittances from abroad are the main source of income, and the relations with the US remain tense, periods of thaw, and then refreezing, depending on the American administration. So here's the mad thing. In the 1910s, I think, America brought in what they called the Trading with the Enemy Act. And what this act did was it made it a criminal offense to spend money in any country that America deems to be the enemy. So after the communist revolution in Cuba, Cuba was declared to be the enemy. Saudi Arabia wasn't after 9/11, the biggest and most successful terrorist attack in American history that was formulated, paid for, and carried out by Saudis. They didn't declare Saudi Arabia. That was a place that would be, deemed, if you traded with them, enemy of the people. But what this means is, if you go to Cuba, say on a yacht, on a boat, whatever, and you spend money in Cuba, and then you go back to America, and they go, where you been? You say, I've been to Cuba. And they go, we're going to fine you. We might take your boat, and we might throw you in jail for trading with the enemy. Because you're not supposed to trade with... Ironic that America, 1, land of the free, 2, the land of capitalism, has a literal rule that says you can't go here and you can't spend money and you can't buy things and tell them stuff. You can't trade. So you can't sell them stuff either. You can't go over to Cuba, technically, if you're American, and sell someone an old Super Nintendo and get 50 quid for it and take it back to America. You go to jail for that. How dare you do that trade? How dare you? How very dare you? Anyway, so that had thawed in 2014 under Obama, but then 3 years later, that orange twat brought it back. I hate him. Anyway, right, so that's the story of Cuba pretty much. I don't know if I missed a lot out. I probably did. But, you know, it's I've only got an hour. And I wanted to show you this. This is a video, which I hope you enjoy, which is my time when I was in Cuba. Well, no, trying to get to Cuba back in the day from the place called Key West in Florida. That's where I was trying to get to. The Conch Republic. That's what it was called. So we're going to have a quick look at this video. Now, the quality is shit. The reason why the quality is shit is because my original tapes, my original high-definition tapes from this time were in a warehouse or in Lonely Planet HQ in Footscray in Melbourne, and I don't know where they are now. I don't know where the tapes are. This is the only copy I've got, and it's shit quality. It's like 240p. So yeah, enjoy as we go over to, I don't know what, I'm streaming in 4K. This is going to be mad. But there you go. There's me looking like I've just released it. An noxious smelling fart. Oh, hang on. I'm talking about the buses in America. I said, I tell you, the buses in America. Sorry, I'll press play now. Not one that's particularly funny at 3 in the morning. Ooh, title sequence. 1 man, 1 year. Took me 4 years. Every nation. Well, I hope no one. Okay, tomorrow we should find out from the US government if I'm allowed to go to Cuba or not. If I'm not allowed to Cuba to go, or they don't come up with a decision, then the SHIT is going to hit the fan. Ooh. What I need is a foreign captain on a foreign sailboat, because they couldn't do much about that. It's only Americans that have a problem with going to Cuba. Finding someone, it's another matter.
This is Captain Finbar of the Conch Republic.
Oh, right. Captain Finbar.
Which was set up in response to the US setting border patrols up on the North Keys. So they went out on this boat. Was it this boat that you went out on?
The Wolf, yes.
Yeah, and they attacked the US Coast Guard.
Actually, HMS Wolf.
HMS Wolf.
Yes, because the Conch Republic does have a king.
So the actual Florida Keys are the Conch Republic, and each year they commemorate the famous naval battle of, was it 1982? Was it?
Yeah, the Great Battle of the Conch Republic, Key West Harbor.
In which these guys went out on a boat and attacked the US Coast Guard with water balloons and stale bread.
Yeah.
And did you win? Did you win the battle?
Of course.
Yeah?
Of course we won. We're the good guys.
I just want to say, I got news that Admiral Finbar there of the schooner Wolf, he passed away in January. It's pretty sad for the whole, the Key West community. People know each other. It's not that big a place, and he was a larger than life character. And yeah, I think a lot of us are going to miss him. Anyway, moving on. This is Key West.
It's St. Paddy's Day in Key West. What's your name?
I'm Angelo, and I'm blooming right into you from Key West.
Happy St. Patrick's Day. Here's the St. Patrick.
So this is St. Patrick, and he had a staff with a snake around it, and his snake let Irish whiskey out of its mouth. It spat. So you put your little cup under it and you get that night I ended up in a naked disco and I woke up on a pirate ship. It was a good night. It was a good night. I've just got a response back from the US government, from the Treasury Department, and they've written, "We have reviewed your requests to go to Cuba and I'm unable to determine that your proposed travel falls within any of the 11 categories of travel set forth in Article 151.560A of the regulations for which specific licenses may be issued. Accordingly, your application is hereby denied." We've wasted so much time here in Florida, and now it looks like it's all just come to absolutely nothing.
can't believe this whole project's just been absolutely stuffed up by the bloody US government.
Bloody US government.
Fuck's sake. I'm standing on the most southerly point of continental USA. Cuba is just 90 miles in that direction. I have no clue what to do next. There's a guy who's written a book about getting to Cuba. I'm going to meet the author at 2 o'clock today. But if he can't help me, I really don't know how I'm going to do this. This is Mike Bellows, who's the author of the definitive guide of how to get to Cuba. So he's been helping me all day.
It is credit to Graham's personality that I am going through this, because I have no idea who this guy is. He just comes across as a really nice guy.
He's put me in touch with a guy who is going over to Mexico on a boat. But we may very well develop engine problems and have to just pull into Cuba.
If your captain's happy with this, then I think you're in good shape.
The place we're in at the moment is called Harpoon Harry's. They've really helped me out. The bar staff have been great, and also, obviously, critical information.
It's now Thursday, the 19th of March. I'm still in the USA, but it looks like I might be leaving today. Fingers crossed. Got to go meet the captain now. This is the Mariposa Retreat, where I've been staying with Midge.
Butterfly.
Okay, thanks, Midge. You're a legend.
Thank you.
You take care.
Say hi to Fidel and Raul.
Don't tell anyone.
Right, f*** you, Uncle Sam. I'm going to Cuba.
Yes!
That was a hell of a sail. That was a hell of a sail. I don't know if you can get to sailing or anything, but the Gulf of Mexico, she's quite untamable.
Clocking up some speed. We're going at about 8.5 knots. Which is about 8.5 miles an hour, which is pretty good. I'm steering at the moment, badly. I'm wobbling all over the place like an idiot. Possibly because I'm looking at the camera while I'm trying to steer. We just spoke to the people on the boat over there, and it's the Mariposa. It's the yacht that I was on from Antigua to St. Martin. That's Kerry and Andrew over there.
That was another boat that I managed to catch
I'm pretty good. Is that Kerry?
It is. You've been stuck in the States for a while, I take it.
Yeah, I was waiting for a couple of weeks to get permission off the US authorities to come to Cuba.
Get you on the other side.
Yeah, take care. Bye-bye. We're about to launch the dinghy and step foot on Cuban soil. Yes!
Captain Johnny there.
Yes! I'm in Cuba! It almost seems crazy that I've spent so much time and effort and money getting here to Cuba, and in the end we're only going to be staying for, what, 6 hours, and then we're leaving again. But this is the way the Odyssey works. I'm not here to enjoy myself in each country and go out and have a good time with the locals. I'm here to travel. I'm here to prove it's possible to travel to every country. And the reason why I'm trying to show it's possible and that you can do it is because it shows that the world isn't the crazy, scary place that the leaders for the last 8 years of our government have been telling us that it is.
So
yeah,
I'm going to give you 5. Okay, look, there we go. I'm giving him 5 pesos.
I'm trading with the enemy! I just realised that I can't actually leave Cuba without having proper Havana
digital
Club
evidence
rum.
to be trading with the enemy there.
15 years.
15 years, down the hatch.
950 a shot.
Whoa.
$9.50 a shot.
Wish you told me that before I drank it.
Remember the days.
You know, dolphins have folded brains like humans. Kangaroos don't, they just have smooth brains, but dogs, monkeys, humans, dolphins, they all have folded brains, so if you actually stretch them out, they'll be the size of a very large pizza. I'm telling you, the buses in.
Okay, that just goes back to the beginning. What on earth? I don't know why I put that little bit at the end there, but that was fun. Oh well, I hope you enjoyed that. That was me getting to Cuba, how I got to Cuba, and then had some rum in Maria Lagoda. which is where we came in. So that's it for now. That's it for tonight. We're coming just in time, I think. What are we on? We're on 1 hour and 35 seconds. Brilliant. I think there was a bit of delay at the start getting that started. So that all works out. That all works out, right? Doesn't it? So I will be back tomorrow morning, unless you're watching this on catch up, and then I'll be back whenever. But I'll be back tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock for Morning Brew. And I need to tell you now, a little bit of housekeeping, that we're not doing the agenda at 1 o'clock because Phil's internet is up the spout. So if he can sort out his internet by the evening, we'll be doing the agenda, which is a bit more of a sober show about British politics. We'll be doing that maybe 6 o'clock in the evening, and then we'll be doing the old famous social, the politics social, Friday night social. We'll be doing that on tomorrow night at 9:30. Sorry we missed that last week. It was my birthday. How much did you have to drink that? I think that was it, mate. Duke, I think that was just that shot. It was $9.50. That was my budget for the week. Enjoyed that, says Sarah Davis. Yeah, so that was really cool watching. I haven't actually watched that back. I haven't watched that back since I made it, like 15 years ago or something. That's quite fun. Okay, so take care, everyone. Thank you very much for the chat. Thanks for the super chat. Like I say, I'll be back in the morning. Give us a like on the way out. That would be very nice of you. Just give us a like. And until next time, I'll say thanks for watching. Hello, good evening, welcome, and